Goulburn Murray Hume Ag Care.
Goulburn Murray Hume Ag Care. So Paul's had a really good, background in sitting around the kitchen table with farmers and helping them think through some of these financial decisions. So he now works for the Department of Economic Development, Jobs, Transport and Resources as a farm... I do know that because 2 months ago I worked for them. And Paul, I suppose Paul's primary role at the moment is leading the Livestock Farm Monitor project. So a bit like John, he has some background in benchmarking and understanding what drives the profitable farming systems. So today he's got some really good knowledge that he's going to run us through, and really, I suppose, some practical ways in which we can apply some of the methods. So welcome, Paul, and
thanks, Ash.
Enjoy yourself.
Thank you very much. Enjoy yourself as much as you can when you're looking through some numbers on up on a big screen here. But thanks very much, and thanks for coming to hear me speak. When I was asked to speak, one of the briefs I was given was that there's going to be lots of producers here. Yeah, there'll be lots of industry people and people who aren't on farm. But one of the things that we really wanted is to perhaps be able to give the farmers here some simple tools that they could just take away. That's going to be something that they can hopefully go home from the end of the day and go, well, there's something that I can implement in my own business. And so partial budgeting is one of those little tools. So we're going to go through that a bit today. I'm going to just talk very briefly about some of the theory behind it, but we're really just going to go through some examples, and I've got a couple of examples here, one pretty simple one and one a little bit more complex, to, I suppose, step through some of the things that you might consider when you're making some changes on your farm. And I suppose right at the start, what I want to acknowledge is that farmers are great decision makers, and so you're always making decisions. You're making decisions about what animals you're gonna run, whether you're going to sell animals tomorrow, next week, whether you're going to you're making decisions based on climate change, whether you want to call it that. You're making those decisions every day in your farming business. But as we heard this morning, the better producers tend to often put a bit of structure around some of that business decision making, and use information to help them use those decisions. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is probably what you are already going through in your mind on a very regular basis, but this is just formalising it a little bit more to put a bit more of a structure around, I suppose, your gut feel decisions. And later on, if people are interested, I've got a copy of my presentation here, but I've also got a bit of a little worksheet here that you can take home and play around with, and I'll show you that up on the screen in a minute. But often you can do these calculations on the back of an envelope, and we talk about back of an envelope calculations, and this is some of the stuff you can actually do on the back of an envelope. So partial budgets. Oh, can I actually, before we start, can I ask people to, for a show of hands, of who actually does a 12-month cash flow budget for their business, for their farm? So some. And then how many people use it as opposed to the bank? I know there's a few bank guys here, and a lot of times you really just do it because the bank manager tells you to. And I think Chris Myrams talks about some figures of about 40% of farmers use a cash flow budget, and then only about 40% of those actually really use it properly. So again, one of the things that I've done is in my benchmarking report is had a bit of a talk to some of the people who can repeatedly hit the top 20%, and one of the things that they do is they have a really strong handle on the financial performance of their business, and they without exception do a cash flow budget. So I would encourage you to do that, but this is maybe another tool you can either add to or use instead of. So partial budget, it's used really to examine a simple change on a farm. So if you're going to making it, and the next point there, which is about a steady state of other factors. So if you're looking at making a big change to your enterprise, you might be looking to change from spring or autumn to spring calving. Sorry, hopefully this morning we wouldn't be going from spring back to autumn calving. But if you're making some major changes, then a partial budget isn't the tool. So if you're going to do things like that, you should be really using a full-blown, cash flow budget. So it can be used for small decisions, and we're going to have a look at a couple of smaller ones here, but also you can use it for some big decisions as well. So that's a bit of the background. Methodology, there's basically 4 components, and as I said before, you're probably thinking about these things all the time. So if you're faced with a decision in your business, you'll be thinking, if I make this decision, will it lead to added income? Will it lead to added costs? Will it lead to reduced costs, or will it lead to reduced income? So there's sort of your 4 main factors that you'll be considering. And so I might just quickly shoot straight on to the next slide, which is actually the example of the budget, just so that you can see what this looks like. I'm supposed to stand on this spot here, but I'm going to have to wriggle away from it a bit so I can actually see it. So on this side of the budget, we put in here our increases in our net income, and on this side also the decrease in our costs. Over this side, decrease in income, increase in costs. Basically add them up, and then the change in the net income basically will help you make the decision as to whether that change that I'm looking to make, will it make me more money or won't it make me more money? So let's just park that for a minute and let's have a look at an example. So this is a very simple example that you might be able to think about. So what I've done here, don't necessarily worry about the exact numbers that are in here, because a lot of this just popped out of my head. So we're not going to get too hung up on whether these numbers are exactly right, but it's the process that we're worried about. So this time of year or in the next couple of months, this is a decision you might be thinking about. Looking to put some urea on 50 acres on a hay paddock to boost the hay production. So pretty straightforward thought. So this is how you would use the tool. So we would look at over here, we've got an increase in the cost, and the increase in the cost is obviously to purchase the urea. I'm not sure if those sums are exactly right, but they're sort of in the ballpark. The other increased cost, obviously, is that we're going to have to make that extra hay, so that's a cost to our business as well. So we've got 2 increasing costs there, totalling up to $3,200. So that's part 1 of it. So part 2 is that we're also going to get this increased hay production, which is the aim of the exercise. So what you then have to do is try and think about, well, what is that hay going to be worth? And so what we've said is we've increased the production here from 4 to 6 tonnes a hectare. As I said, I'm not sure if those numbers are 100% accurate. And we're going to value the hay at about $180 a tonne. So what you're going to do is you're going to spend $3,200 over here, and your increase in your income is $7,200. So that decision effectively has made you $4,000. And so potentially, I suppose what we've tried to do here is we've put a value on the hay, which you mightn't normally put a value like that on your hay, but if you had to go out and buy that hay from somewhere else, that's probably what you would have to pay for it. So that's some of the economic thinking, if you like, that goes into this, that as a farmer you might not consider that hay is actually worth $7,200 to me. I'm happy to take questions. Yeah, I've got one already. I shouldn't have said that.
Does it make sense to put a probability on your yield increase?
Well, that is an excellent question. Yes. So
That's almost unachievable, actually.
Is it? Well, there you go. Yep. So let's have a look at the next slide then. It's good that you asked that question. So you've ended up ordering your urea late, and therefore the price has gone up before you could lock in a price. And also the agronomist suggested that you bump up the rate a little bit. Again, some of these numbers might be exactly right. So did Jim Dehennon walk in the room? Did I see Jim? No, he didn't. But anyway, so you go to somebody like Jim who used to sell fertiliser, and you'd say, I'm late, and he'll go, well, you've got to put more of it on and I'm going to charge you more for it. So that's what happens, isn't it?
Once again, don't go putting that much on because it's cold paddocks.
Well, again, that's a fair point. That is too much urea to be putting on. But what I wanted to do is demonstrate how you can use the tool. So despite all this, we only got an increase of 1 tonne per hectare in our hay production because we did it late and blah, 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 all that stuff. So here we go. Let's do the exercise again. We've got the increase in the costs here. Probably our haymaking costs won't be as much, but we've spent $4,000. We've only got $3,600 worth of benefit. So that decision to put that urea on the paddock to try and boost that hay production has actually cost us money. So you would have been better off just to have gone and bought the hay off the neighbour at $180 a tonne, given that example. I suppose for this example, I was thinking you were going to be cutting the hay off it anyway. The point of the example was really just to see if you could boost the production. So that's just a simple example, the first example of showing that if you play around with these numbers, and this is where your informed decision making comes from, is that if you want to play around with these numbers and try and get these numbers as accurate as you can for your own situation, it can help you drive a decision, not based on the fact that I want to cut a heap of hay, but based on the fact, is that decision going to actually make me money or cost me money? And the beauty of doing this, especially if you set up a simple spreadsheet like this, you can have 10 versions of this that say, if I spend this much money on urea and I can increase my production by 20% or 10%, then it will pay for itself. So again, that comes down to that probability. What's the likelihood of me being able to increase it by sufficient to be able to cover the cost of doing it? So you're exactly right. And you've got an idea what it's done in the past. What is a bit unknown in some of these decisions is what the weather's going to do. Yeah. And I've got another case study in a second which is a bit more complex and has got a lot more unknowns in it. So if you reckon that one's a bit hard to follow, this is the next one. And this is possibly a decision that people are going to be faced with in 2 months' time, 3 months' time. Late October, following a dry spring, you're faced with either selling your 50 steer calves now for a lower price or feeding them through, basically going out buying some feed and feeding them through to that January, February sale, which is when you traditionally might sell them. So there's a heap of assumptions in this, but bear with the process. So the feed that you're looking to buy them is a combination of you've got some hay on hand, and you're going to have to buy in some hay and pellets. But there's a bit of an assumption in here as well that your pasture is going to deteriorate to the point where it's not contributing a lot to their diet. So I've just stepped through this one in stages, if you like. So the first process we have to do here is think about, okay, well, we're going to forego some income if we sell those cattle early. So they're going to be lighter and the price is likely to be less. And again, some of these numbers are as rubbery as you like them to be. They're probably not likely to even be 350 kilos at that point, so that figure might even be less. So what that's saying is if I sell those cattle in October, rather than take them through to January, I'm going to lose about $10,000 worth of income. So that's probably ballpark, that's reasonable. So what else might we have to consider when we're doing this process? We're going to have to buy some feed. So we're going to have to buy some feed.
And they're on a paddock that might be resting otherwise.
Yep, well, that's one of your other unknown benefits later on, is if you sell them early, you might be able to rest that paddock. So what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to go and buy some feed. So what I've said is that some of our feed is going to come from hay in the shed, but we're also going to have to buy some of it in. So this is the cost of the feed that you've had to buy in. And also, this is one that we don't often consider, is that you're going to have the labour to actually go and feed that out. Now, even if that's you doing it yourself, if you're looking at it from a purely sort of economic perspective, you should take into account that you should be paying yourself. So you need to really work out in here the cost of labour for you to feed those animals for the next 3 or 4 months. The last thing that we've got to consider is that we had all this hay in the shed that we should be putting a value next to, because if we're not going to put it down the throats of those animals, in theory, we could sell it. So we might choose not to sell it, but we need to put a cost next to that hay that we haven't actually had to put down the throats of those animals. So initially you might think, whoa, hang on a minute. This is I'm going to be foregoing about $10,000 odd dollars worth of income here by doing this process, but to have got that 10,000, it's cost me about 17. So what's the answer to the question? Sell them in October and go to the beach for the summer.
Is your heading there correct? It says decrease in cost, but the labour is increased.
No, because you haven't had to.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. So in this scenario, you haven't had to use that labour to feed it, and that's the tricky thing is when you're a farmer, you probably don't put value next to your labour. Whereas if you're thinking about making these sort of decisions, you probably should. Opportunity cost. That in theory, you could go out and work somewhere else for that, or you could spend that time somewhere else in the farm making money. So this is an example here again where you could start looking at that sensitivity analysis. So you could say, well, I've got more than 40 bales of hay in my shed. I'm not going to have to go and buy all this feed off the farm. So potentially I can put the money down their throats for a lesser cost than what I would have to go out and buy it. And then this is where it starts to get really crystal ball gazing, because in October, you could get an inch of rain in October and you're going to get some grass and it's going to finish them off or whatever. So it's all about managing the risk and I suppose using some information to help you make informed decisions. And so what you might choose to do is do this with half of your animals. So, it's about spreading that risk, saying, well, I think the season's going to end up dry, so I'm going to quit some of them, but on the off chance that we think that we're going to get a late shower rain and we're going to go through to spring, I can keep some of them. So, it's again about playing around with these numbers to see how that looks. I think you should use the opportunity cost if you were to sell it. I know the temptation is just to use the cost of what it's cost you to actually make it, but if you were really going to do this totally honestly, I think that you should use that opportunity cost of if you were to sell it. And again, that's the same with this labour question. If you actually didn't take into account the value of your hay in your shed, you didn't take into account your labour, well, you would go and buy the feed and put it down the throats of the animals, because you would think that you're going to make more money doing that. But if you're really going to look at it truthfully and honestly, I think you have to take into account your own labour, plus you have to take into account what the opportunity cost is for that feed. As I said, if people, I think my email details are in the proceedings. If people wanted to get this electronically, then I'm happy to send that around, because in some ways that's some of the real usefulness of it is that you don't have one version of it. You have a few different versions of it. You play around with it. And so instead of you standing out in the paddock and looking at those steers saying, well, do I sell them now at that sort of price or do I hang on to them? This is perhaps giving you a bit more information, another tool in the toolbox to help you make that decision. And so quickly in summary, I think we've got a few minutes left, but again, as I've just described then, it's a quick and easy way of putting some numbers around what is often just a gut feeling decision. They might hopefully help you arrive at a decision that might help you improve the profitability of your business in full, and it might also help you with some of those conversations with your bank. So if you were to have to go out and go to the bank and actually borrow the money for one of these decisions that you're thinking of making, and you can walk into the bank manager with some of this information in front of you, will they be happy with that? Yep, I reckon they would be. So to give them some confidence that you've really put a lot of thought behind your decision and that you're making that real informed decision. So that's pretty much the end of the presentation. So as I said, I'm happy to send around electronic copies of this, although I think even if you just Google on the website, those of you who have access to the internet, if you Google partial budgets, then they're available anywhere, and the presentation is there as well. So it's got a hard copy if you want to take one of those as well.